Hello, my name's Tim Congdon. I'm UKIP's economic spokesman. This is another of my fireside chats. I want to talk about a very important economic topic for the benefit really of membership of UKIP, although anybody is really welcome to watch this video. Now, what I find at branch meetings, public meetings and so on is that one constant topic comes up time and time again. It's this allegation by the other side that if we left the European Union, we would lose up to 3 million jobs because our exports would be at risk. This allegation is nonsense. We get it time and time again, and what I want to do in the next quarter of an hour or so is to demolish it. I'm going to be using some slides, and these will be available separately in a PowerPoint presentation. But let me just make my points, and I'm going to just start off by telling you what the heart of this allegation is. Roughly speaking, in Britain at the moment, there are about 30 million people in employment. Our exports are about 20% of national income. And about half of them go to Europe. So it's 30 million people, 20% of that is 6 million people, and then half of that is 3 million people. Okay. Look, if Britain left the European Union, there would still be exports to the European Union of around about 10% of national income. I can tell you that with a lot of confidence for two reasons. One is that many countries do not belong to the European Union and they still export to it in large numbers, huge value of exports. In fact, Britain is not the largest exporter to the European Union. China is, and China doesn't belong to the European Union. There'll be some effects on our exports. There'll be marginal effects because of changes in tariff rates and so on. There'd be offset, there might be some small loss of exports to the European Union. There would be more exports to the rest of the world. So there would not be a massive loss of jobs. And I make that point for a very important second reason. Because some people say, if we leave, then the Germans and French will discriminate against us. They won't buy our goods. Look, Britain is a huge importer from the European Union. In fact, we have a very large trade deficit with the rest of Europe. So if they started to punish us because we left the European Union, we could punish them too, and because they sell us more than we sell to them, they would lose. But look, there's no reason to expect that. The European Union has free trade agreements with Switzerland, with Norway, with Mexico, for heaven's sake. Mexico has nothing to do with Europe. And so there is no reason to expect that there'd be a major loss of exports if we left the European Union, and therefore a major loss of jobs. So that is the heart of the argument. But I've also, in the last day or two, been doing a bit of work on some of the numbers connected with this subject. I used to work in the City of London. I always believe in getting into data. I enjoy working with data and putting numbers together, statistics and so on. And I really want to show in the next few minutes just what complete codswallop these people are talking. And I'm going to be bit by bit referring to slides and so on, and they'll pop in and out of the presentation. This is the first picture I want to show you. It shows you the employment since we joined the European Union back in 1973. In fact, the chart goes back to 1971. The blue bars at the bottom are employment of men, and the red bar at the top is employment of women. You can see the number is higher today than it was in 1971. But is this because we joined the European Union? When were these jobs created? We joined the European Union, as I said, in January the 1st, 1973. What this chart shows is that 5 years later, total employment was slightly lower. And 10 years later, was definitely lower. Okay? Now look, if a membership of the common market as it then was, the common market became the European Union, was supposed to have created jobs, I ask you when? Didn't do so in the first 10 years. There were no positive employment effects in our first decade of membership of the common market. None. Nonsense. But then let's look a little bit more closely at this evolution over time, and also at what I want to focus on is particularly employment of men. There was indeed eventually higher employment while we were members of the common market, and then it became the European Union. But this had nothing to do with a membership of the European Union. The obvious feature is this strong growth in the 80s and 90s of employment of women. That has nothing to do with the European Union. That is a change in the pattern of work because of changes in social structure, families, and so on. Let's look at this chart here of employment of men. Obviously, all through this period, I don't want to be sort of too chauvinist about all this, but obviously most of the period, men were the main breadwinners in families, and so let's look at them in particular. What you see here is that 10 years after we joined the European Union, 1983, employment of men was 1.5 million lower than it was in 1973. Where are these extra jobs? Where are these extra 3 million jobs? They're not to be found here, are they? Of course, there was then a recovery of employment. And today, the employment of men in our country is about the same as it was in the early 1970s. But that, obviously, the growth occurred many years after we joined the common market, then the European Union, and the common market membership does not explain that growth of employment. Other forces were at work. On the other side, stop making these silly claims about 3 million jobs at risk. What I've done here is to try and just set out a bit more key milestones, and you can just to reinforce that point. 10 years after we joined the common market, employment of men in our country had fallen by 1.5 million. All right? No 3 million extra jobs at all. The last 10 or 15 years have, of course, mostly been under a Labour government. And this Labour government was in some ways very welcoming to foreign employment. In fact, many trade union members traditionally would be supporters of Labour, of course, felt that Labour had become too sympathetic to multiculturalism, foreign workers, immigration, and so on. What I want to bring out here, this is a chart going back to 1997. As you can see that in this period, what I've done here is change things slightly. I've got the bar, the blue bar at the bottom. The blue part of the bar is of employment of UK-born workers, men and women. And the red part of the bar at the top is employment of foreign-born workers, again, men and women. Already you can see from this that in this period, dominated by New Labour and a relatively open immigration policy, there was rapid growth of employment of foreign-born workers. Now, an important part of all this was that in 2003, a large number of East European countries, former communist countries for the most part, joined the European Union. And Britain, under Labour, decided that it would immediately open its labour market to people from these East European countries. So we had an influx of workers from Poland, Czech Republic, and so on. What surprised me when I looked at these numbers in more detail was the pattern of employment growth this has been going on. What surprised me was the pattern in the last 5, 6, 7 years. What you see here is that the cumulative increase in employment since 1997. I'll make it a little bit complicated. The blue bit shows you the increase in employment since 1997 of UK-born workers. Now you can see that peaked some years ago, about 2006. And in fact, since then, the number of UK-born workers in employment in our country has fallen a bit. Obviously, there's been a Great Recession and so on. And then the red bar, the red part of the bar, shows you strong growth of foreign-born employment of foreign-born workers, which continued through the Great Recession. Now look, I'm not xenophobic. I'm generally friendly towards foreigners, and I have no animosity towards the rest of Europe, not at all. However, it would be open to somebody to interpret this chart as saying that British workers did lose jobs because there were a lot of people coming from the rest of the European Union. That would not be a silly interpretation of this chart. In other words, a membership of the European Union destroyed jobs available to people born in our country. Okay. I don't want to leap to that conclusion, but it's invited by this chart. Let's try and then bring some of these numbers together. In the period from the start of 1997 to the end of last year, end of 2011, UK-born employment rose by about 750,000, mostly women, by the way. Of the same period, foreign-born employment increased by over 2 million, almost 2.25 million people, and many of those would have been from the rest of Europe, particularly, of course, the coming from Eastern Europe after 2003. To some extent, in the Great Recession, there had been some movement of workers from Ireland because of the depth of their recession. The implication of what I've just analysed is so astonishing, I could hardly believe it when I worked it out. We've seen that the growth of employment in the last 10 or 15 years has been very heavily because of employment of foreigners. We know that the number of men in employment in our country today is roughly the same as it was in 1972. It follows, this must be true, it follows that there are fewer men born in our country in employment today, 39 years after joining the European Union, than there were in 1972. That's fact. That must be true. There are fewer men born in our country in employment today than there were when we joined the European Union. Where are these extra 3 million jobs? There aren't, they don't exist, they're nonsense. And the truth is that the European Union destroys jobs. I've set out quite a strong argument for believing, and I don't want to be xenophobic about it, quite a strong argument for believing that in the last few years, having an open border, letting people come to our country from the rest of the European Union without restriction, has meant a reduction in the number of jobs available to people of British birth. I don't want to overdo this, but that can't be avoided from the facts I've set out. There is a larger problem here, that in the European Union there are massive controls and regulations and restrictions on employment, all sorts of ways in which the bureaucrats add to costs, make it difficult for employers to take people on and so on. As a result of this, the number of people of working age actually in employment in, I'm going to say the Eurozone here, in the European Union without Britain, if you like, is lower than across the industrial world as a whole. What you find is that the employment ratio, as economists call it, is lower in the Eurozone than in Canada, America, Japan, and actually, in fact, than in the United Kingdom, because even though we've been part of the European Union, we've tried to have our own labour laws, our own exemptions from some of these directives. Let's just see the numbers here. You see, in Canada, the employment ratio is almost 72%. In Japan, it's 71%. In our country, it's 70%, over 70%. America, 69%. Eurozone, 65%. This is the result of EU regulation. EU regulation destroys jobs. So let me summarise the central message of what I've just said over the last few minutes. This is very important in these debates we have with other parties. It is not true that 3 million jobs would be destroyed if Britain left the European Union. On the contrary, it is the European Union that destroys jobs through excessive regulation. Let's also be clear. 2 facts I want to get over to finish. There are fewer men of British birth in employment today than they were in the last year before we joined the European Union. That's fact number 1. And fact number 2 is that in the last 5 or 6 years, employment of foreign-born people in Britain has risen when employment of British-born people has fallen. There appears to have been a policy of open borders and letting people from the rest of European Union work here. That policy appears to have led to some loss of jobs for people of British birth. We do not need to belong to the European Union to have extra employment. On the contrary, the European Union destroys jobs. 3 million jobs are not at risk if we leave the European Union. Thank you.